Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Constant, and I'm here with Duane Toops, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Conversation About Art. Today, we're going to be talking to David Hornung. He's a painter and mixed media artist from the Hudson Valley in New York. So, welcome, David.
Thank you.
David, I'd like to start the conversation by asking you about your art background, how you got involved in art, if you went to school for art, and how did it all happen?
hmm From a very early age, actually, I sort of identified as a painter, as an artist. I would say I started painting really seriously by age 16. I grew up in Chadds Pennsylvania, and nearby northern Delaware, which is the hometown of Andrew Wyeth.
Oh,
And Andrew Wyeth was an acquaintance of my father. And he was like my first big art hero. And my early paintings in high school were really sort of imitation Andrew Wyeth paintings. And then I went to school and I majored in painting at the University of Delaware. I spent a year in London studying art and went to grad school at University of Wisconsin, where I took an MFA. And then from then on, I started a teaching career. I taught for 50 years at the art schools and universities. Skidmore College, Rhode Island School of Design, Parsons, Pratt. So a lot of different places. Adelphi University was my last full-time teaching gig, which I retired from in 2020.
and so you still teach workshops?
Yes, I started doing workshops in summers and during holidays back in around 2009. Adult workshops. I taught at Anderson Ranch. I taught for MISA, Madeline Island School of Art, and other organizations. And then in 2020, when I retired, I really embraced workshop teaching. So I was teaching about 12 workshops a year. And next year, I'm going to try to cut back to nine, but I do 9 to 12 workshops a year. And they're adult workshops with some very sort of, I would say, advanced artists. Some I would regard as peers. I just think they like to talk about art. And I teach a workshop in color, a workshop in design, a workshop in mixed media improv, and a workshop in abstract painting improv.
But you no longer teach at schools?
No, I
Okay.
don't work with college students anymore. Mostly women between the age of 50 and 70 who are like amazingly receptive and talented and really open to experimentation. It's really a wonderful group of people to work with.
And do you have a gallery that represents you right now?
Yeah, I show, well, in New York City, J.J. Murphy Gallery,
Mhm.
and I also show regionally at Cynthia Winning's Gallery, and which is in Maine, Blue Hill, Maine. And I have a show right now at Nancy Devine Gallery in Warren, Rhode Island. And I show at Elena Zhang Gallery in Woodstock, New York. I get around.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at some of your work right now. So, David, we're looking at your first image, which is called Rotor. And I think the first thing that strikes me about your imagery, they're abstract, but they always look like they have some relationship to the real world. So,
Mhm.
is that intentional?
That's an interesting question. Everything that's there is intentional. I mean, shapes that I'm drawn to, that's an intention. Of course, I do invite chance into the process in order to tap into the unconscious mind, which I think anybody that improvises understands what that's all about. But I think I know what you're getting at. I don't intend a specific reference. The shapes I'm drawn to come either from nature or they come from manufactured shapes, but particularly aquadynamic and aerodynamic shapes like propellers and rudders, things like that. I like shapes that manufactured shapes that are sort of formed in relation to dynamic processes like wind and water, but also geometric shapes that are made more specific by variation. So instead of a perfect circle, a circle that's been nicked or twisted or turned. You're right, it does have a kind of pictorial implication. And I think that's partly because I'm pretty much of a shape-based abstractionist. I think gesture-based abstraction is less prone to that. But if you're using shapes, it's natural for people to try to find familiarity or find a home there. And it's very natural for people to see imagery in abstract shapes.
So when you start an image like this, do you just start with a blank piece of paper or canvas and then just start painting or adding shapes and just see what develops as you go along?
That pretty accurately describes it. Yes, this is paper. All the collages that you're showing, and most of the things you're going to be showing are mixed media collage. But I make collages out of painted paper. So I spend a lot of time just painting papers. And then I use those, I cut them and tear them, and orchestrate them with a lot of revision. So I'll just start with a kind of a rough configuration and then begin a kind of dialogue with the piece. And it leads me ultimately to a resolution that I can accept.
I think one of the things I'm most interested in, especially looking at your work and well, to start with, one of the things I really appreciate, there's a certain degree of playfulness, but yet a very clear idea of structure. So I like the way these two things are sitting together. And I'm really curious, it seems like you have a design background. So I'm wondering, does any of that still inform your current work? And if so, how do you see that play out?
Everything I've ever thought or studied or talked about probably comes into play. Design, I prefer the word composition. I think of design as kind of a graphic enterprise, and I don't think of my work as graphic. I think of it as more, it's softer than that. Because I engage chance in the process and because of the sense of play. I think of it as painting, actually. I think of my collage pieces as painting with paper, torn and cut paper. I spent all my life thinking about and looking at art and thinking about the character of shape and composition, and color is very important. I actually wrote a textbook on color that's the first edition was in 2005 and the third edition came out in 2020. So color is really an important issue with me. I've always been very informed by the playfulness of Paul Klee. He's a major influence on my work. One thing I really love about him is that he kind of follows the argument where it leads in any given piece. You don't really feel like he's in any way formulaic in his work. And there's a sense of invention. It's serious but lighthearted is the way I would describe his work. I would like my work to be like that. I think temperamentally I'm drawn to that.
I think I can definitely see that in your work. There's a sense of childlike wonder in it. And I mean that in the best possible way, but also this clear idea of balance and the way that the colors are situating together nicely. I'm really interested in what you said about chance. What does that look like for you? And maybe even what does that look like for you in the specifics of maybe a piece like this?
The beauty of collage as a process, as opposed to painting, is that it's very easy to let chance in because the pieces are in flux and the edges are non-negotiable. The big difference between painting and collage, paintings, every edge is negotiable. So it presents different kinds of challenges. Collage has this kind of freshness, like the 40th place you placed a shape looks as fresh as the first place you placed it, right? In painting, that quality of freshness has to be achieved. As you work through a painting, make revisions, that's the struggle in painting is to keep that freshness alive. So in collage, you have this credible freshness throughout the process, and at the same time, the possibility of seeing myriad possible combinations, constructions. Sometimes I'll put a composition down but not glue anything and then just shake it. Or sometimes I'll have an idea to put a shape somewhere and it falls accidentally slightly south of where I wanted it, and I can see that that is actually more felicitous than my original intent. So it's being mindful and open. To me, composition in collage and actually in painting too is really a sort of a dialogue between intention and chance. So those first two were older. They're from 1920, I mean 2022 and I think 23. This piece is from this year. And I think everything else we'll be looking at is from this year, from 2026. Well, I call this metaphysical portrait. And this piece was actually sold at an auction for White Columns, the gallery White Columns in New York. I was surprised they picked it because it's kind of a quiet, in some ways, a very quiet piece. And I didn't intend this central configuration to be a head, but just the way it came out, it just seems like a kind of a geodesic head. Although titles are important to me, I usually don't get titles until very close to the end of the process. They kind of jump into my head as the piece is coming into being. This one It's just because of that ovular structure in the center that resembles a head that I had this idea of as being a portrait, but a kind of a schematic, I guess you could say, metaphysical portrait. That's the title of it. Not a portrait of things seen, but more things unseen. The fundamental quality of being a structured ovoid in a planar environment.
Also, you describe yourself as a painter and a mixed media artist. So, looking at this piece, how much of it is painting and how much is collage work?
Well, it's all collage. I never paint on them directly. I only use sheets of pre-painted paper and cut and tear them and glue them down. They're really mixed media constructions. I call them paintings because they're not like, unlike an artist that deals with referential subject matter, references, things like that. My work is very, it's abstract or non-representational, would be a better word. It's really about the facts of its making and the facts of its being. That's the way I think of it. I think of pictorial art as fictional. And this is not a priority. I mean, I love pictorial art, of course, but I think that when you're leading people outside the picture to consider something that you refer to, in a way, you're introducing an element of fiction. Because in fact, what this is here is pieces of flat paper glued to a surface, torn or cut. So there's nothing in this piece that is really an intentional reference. Therefore, it's purely factual. However, because people do see things in it, and you could say that they kind of circumvent the factuality of the piece by insisting on seeing references, which doesn't bother me at all. I mean, that's the prerogative of the viewer. But for me, I'm really interested in organizing facts as opposed to making references. Here's a good analogy: instrumental music. Instrumental music, and I don't mean song. Song is fiction with musical form. So if you listen to, the song Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday? It's a very famous song. It's a poignant song about racial injustice in the South. It's about lynching. And the music formally is it's perfectly tailored to the content of the language. But the language takes you outside the experience of the form of music, the facts of music, and introduces a fictional element. Instrumental music, for example, Thelonious Monk, piece like Round Midnight by Thelonious Monk. There's really nothing there but musical fact. He's not really, there's no overlay of language to take you out of that. Language in music or song is similar to pictorial reference in visual art. That song by Billie Holiday, if someone says, what does this song mean? That's a reasonable question to ask of a song. You could say the song means it's about these lynchings in the South in the 40s and early 50s. If you ask Round Midnight means or Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, it's an inappropriate question to ask what that means, right? You don't experience it that way. You experience it as a series of acoustical facts that embraces you and provides a very rich psychological experience, but it's not a twofold experience. It's a one-fold experience. So when I work on these pieces, what I'm thinking about is colored pieces of paper and organizing them in a way that has a not just interesting, but kind of necessary or essential or elemental. These are things that I'm always looking for. Possibly a sense of wit, but it's only about what's in front of me. I think that my choice to make non-representational work is an expression of my skepticism about meaning and also the primacy of phenomenological experience over literary constructs. However, I mean, that sounds judgmental and it sounds like I'm creating a hierarchy. I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't cast that abroad for others. It's just my own, what moves me most. And what I trust most is my experience of form. I believe in it. I believe in a metaphysical aspect to visual art. I think that comes through form, not through subject matter. Another distinction I make is that this is maybe idiosyncratic. I think of form and content differently than most people do. I think most people think of form as, color, shape, interval, character of the edge, the scale, relative scale, things like that. And I think of content as, is it a tree? Is it a naked body? I think that's not content. I think what that is subject matter. I think that there's form, which I itemized a minute ago, and then there's subject matter, which could be anything that exists outside the piece that you're referring to pictorially. Content, for me, is the character of one's experience of the piece. And form and content are inextricable. Increasingly, I hear artists talking about form and content as if they could be separated, and they actually can't. And I think it's important to recognize that they can't, because therein lies the responsibility of the artist. It's not enough to just slap some pictorial reference down on a flat surface and everything's great. I mean, that kind of randomness might be immediately interesting, but it has no sustenance. I think enduring imagery involves serious interplay between form and content. And by form, but now I'm going to be careful, not subject matter, but content. So there's form and content in pictorial art and in non-representational art. In non-representational art, though, you don't have subject matter. At least you don't intend subject matter. Now, if
Hmm.
somebody sees this as a thing or a reference to a thing, I don't help matters much by calling it metaphysical self-portrait, by the way. But sometimes I like to do that just as kind of a backhanded joke. You can only go so far in the direction of seriousness before you have to bring in a level of absurdity to kind of clear the air.
Do you think in some ways your work is offering an invitation for others to find their own story within it? Like, are you kind of providing them a space in which they can bring a story or find a story that connects to them within just the facticity of the work?
Well, again, using the musical analogy, if a person listens to a string quartet and hears a bird, if there's a high note on the violin, a little run, a little flourish, a triplet that reminds them of a song of a bird, that's subject matter, and that really wasn't intended, but it can be seen as a real part of the experience. Yeah, this is about intention. Like my intention is to engage the facts that I'm working with. I don't worry about meaning because I think the experience of phenomenal reality is profound. I don't think it's trivial. I think that idea that linguistic meaning is real meaning and there can't be like musical reasoning or other kinds of reasoning or other kinds of experience that are equally valid is very much kind of a Western thing. We have, especially in Western Europe, we've developed the primacy of language. Expectations about visual art, especially in the postmodern period, people have been very, I mean, hostile almost to the idea of the significance of form. I think it's a backlash against Greenbergian reductivism and not only that, but the political dominance of whatever, white men and, the museum culture of late modernism, that sort of thing. When you get down to the brass tacks of actually making art, the truth is always going to be that form is not only essential, but it's also profound. In a piece like this, I mean, there's a way in which different elements vie for dominance. Like there's the rhythmic verticals, that's kind of a rhythm that's sort of established, but then the other shapes are kind of artless sometimes. There's also an architectural component to this, but it's none of that means anything. That's what I'm saying. It just is. You experience it. The reason I think this is significant and valuable, and it's really a hard sell for a lot of people. A lot of people can't really appreciate non-representational art because it's so unfamiliar and because it doesn't allow them to have a story. It's a fact that, representational art is an easier sell. There's no question. And I mean intellectually. I don't mean
Mhm.
in the market sense. Pictorial painting is just pictorial art is more accessible. It's no less, I mean, the best of it is no less sophisticated. It's all the best art is really sophisticated, but there is this way in which you're kind of shaking hands with the viewer and embracing him when you put pictures out there. I'm not really doing that. I'm really putting together a kind of visual conditions, I guess I would say, that sort of stimulate a psychological response that has a level of unknowability about it.
So what struck me with what you just said was you're talking about the avoidance of closure. So does that mean you're interested in maintaining an open-endedness,
Hmm.
or is it more about embracing and sitting within some kind of tension?
Probably both. Magritte had a quote. He said something like, "You must be careful to maintain the unknown element, or don't remove the unknown element." He's talking about painting, but if you cross all the T's and dot all the I's, you create a dead thing. I think it's important to think about creating life. You're creating I mean, not literally biological life, but you're creating a condition, a set of relationships that has liveliness and therefore life-likeness. It's a way of not representing the truth in a non-representational sense, but embodying the truth. So this piece is one that I've made two large ones recently. This is, for me, this is large. This is 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. And I composed it on the wall. And normally on smaller pieces, I work on a tabletop, but I found to my surprise that it really was easy to compose on the wall. I was afraid logistically that the gluing process would be more challenging, but it went down really beautifully. And this piece took a long time and a lot of correction, a lot of adjustment. I feel like it still has the energy, that I want to see in a piece, but it also has some beautiful sculptural form. It's called burl, which is a kind of a deformity on a tree, like basically a tumor, a wooden tumor. And bowl makers are always cutting these off and using them as the starting point to turning bowls and things. But I like the idea of a burl. In a way, it's interesting because when I talk to you, I realize that my titles, in some ways, they kind of fly in the face of this idea of no narrative. But I like titles on non-representational things because, in a way, it kind of calls attention to the fragile connection between physical experience and meaning. Do our lives really have meaning? I mean, here's a good question. Do they have meaning, or are they just a series of random events that we as an organism experience until we stop breathing? We bring meaning to it, and our bringing meaning to it is a way of filling the void, of giving significance to something that may really have no significance at all, just our sort of temporary existence. That's kind of I guess, an existential view.
Yeah, I think you're right there. As soon as you were saying that, I immediately thought of that it's almost Nietzschean in a way, in that there's the objective meaning, the capital M meaning, we can agree is, at least from his view, doesn't exist, isn't there, but that isn't any kind of despondency or overt refutation. If anything, it's an invitation to make meaning. Like it gives you a blank canvas to imbue with meaning. What you were talking about the titles, I thought about earlier as well, in that there is a certain degree of, maybe given the playfulness of your work, it's a tongue-in-cheek kind of narrative reference. But would you say that part of what the titles do in your work is give the viewer kind of an entry point into it, kind of a place to come into it, and then start examining facts because they at least have an open door?
Actually, usually the way they enter it, if they look at the title, they enter it saying, I don't get it. What does this title have to do with this image? You know, it's like it's a bit of a stretch. It's because my titles are really they're based on the like a whiff of a suggestion of some connection that I'm seeing very vaguely. The reason I title things is A, it makes it possible, this is a practical thing, to refer to them when they're not in front of you. So if you're on the phone with someone who's interested in a piece, you can refer to it by name. Also, titles, I wrote a title that tries to explain the painting or interpret the painting for the viewer is that's a problem, I think, because you're really shutting doors, you're not opening them. This is an oil painting, it's not a collage. It's 30 inches high, 24 inches wide, and the title of it is Guardian. I defy you to try to figure out why I'm calling it Guardian, but just giving it a name in some ways there's something about naming anything that makes it more familiar. It's like it personalizes it in a very oblique way, but it doesn't really explain this in any way. And why did I call it Guardian? I think it's just the way this form at the top sort of rests, this sort of light form with the blue shape inside it, sort of nestles on top of that sort of octagonal or whatever, how many sides it is, form. The way it kind of shelters it, but it's so oblique, it's just and so you're right. For me, I like tongue-in-cheek titles or really cryptic titles. Like I had a title once that I thought was really great. It was called Epoch of Luminous Decay. I could use that on this painting. It's like it doesn't say, but it's kind of a little kick in the pants, sort of. It's better than number 11 or untitled. There's something, the whole idea of untitled for a piece, that's almost like it's cold.
Yeah, there's a kind of sterility to that.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
as soon as you were talking about naming something, I immediately think about, cultures that are more steeped in a kind of mythopoetics, and that there's this understanding that to name something or to know the true name of something is to have a degree of power over it. And so it seems like what I think I might hear you doing in your use of titling is you're naming something while still allowing it to remain unnameable.
Yes, it is an outstretched hand in a way to the viewer, but not, but it's disguised as a key, but it's not really a key. It's like they think I'm handing them a key, but I'm handing them a banana.
I can't help but wonder, is like, are you actually handing them not a key, but a koan?
Yeah, sure.
Someone asked me once, what does this title have to do with the piece? And I said, well, it's an abstract piece, so it's appropriate to have an abstract title. So I think, like, if the title doesn't apparently relate to the painting, it's because it's an abstract thing that you're working with.
Alan, that is a way better explanation than one I just gave for 15 minutes. That's exactly right. Yeah, the title is itself an abstraction. Yeah, I like that.
And earlier you're talking about music and Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, and to me, it's not about trying to find out what it means, like you're talking about, but it's just an emotional connection. I have an emotional connection to the piece, and it makes me feel a certain way, and there's no words attached to that. It's just an abstract feeling almost in itself.
Yeah, that's right. Um, I would go further. I would say that you could have an abstract response that could be intellectual. I guess not intellectual, but more, well, I think of mind and heart, like I think mind and heart are both present in the perception of art. And things appeal to your heart, but other things appeal to your mind. Like, and actually, if you think of mind and heart on a sliding scale, with each at poles, it's a kind of a continuum. Like more mind, less heart, more heart, less mind. But I think those two components are really important in response to visual art. This is called House of Mirth, which is the title of an Edith Wharton novel. It's one of my favorite recent collages. It's really got I mean, I love the animation in this piece. It just came together really nicely.
And earlier we talked about playfulness, and I'm glad we brought that up in the second painting because that was one topic I wanted to talk about. That's what I see in your work, a lot of playfulness. When you're creating the work, does it feel playful as you're creating it? Because a lot of artists talk about struggling with their pieces and trying to get it to a certain point. So, what is your experience of creating it? Does it feel playful?
Hmm. No, no, I have the same problem everyone else does. The difficulty, the frustration, especially when a piece doesn't come quickly. A collage like this can, probably happen in maybe 6 hours. It's a small piece. But I've had pieces that same size that I spent like, 30 hours on collages, just constantly adjusting and being unsatisfied. I guess what I'm looking for ultimately is a kind of a spirit, a kind of spirit in the work. And that's where the playfulness comes in. Somebody told me a really nice compliment. At first, I wasn't sure. I thought it was a compliment, but she said, your work makes me feel good. When I was younger, I really wanted my work to be portentous and really sort of like Francis Bacon, like serious, dark, full of dread and full of all the sort of angst of existence. I thought that would make me a very powerful and important artist. But my temperament isn't that. I'm really not that. I mean, I guess I'm more of a lyrical kind of sensibility. So I look at a painter like Francis Bacon. He's so foreign to me, and I admire his darkness, and his visceral quality. But I'm really more like, and I mean this quantitatively, not qualitatively. I'm more like Richard Diebenkorn. I temperamentally feel like I know him, like he's someone that I have a kind of spiritual connection to. And his work is essentially lyrical, and it has a sense of play, but also a beautiful sense of architecture. So I think that you discover yourself in your work. You kind of learn who you are, and then there's the problem of accepting yourself. And once you get past that, then you can really make stuff.
Well, I
This
find
is
it really interesting. It's almost a dichotomy that you can go through this experience of struggle when you're creating the work, but then the end result is a playful, almost joyous feeling. I mean, it's really kind of interesting that the creative process can contain both of those experiences.
Yeah. Well, I love problem solving. And if I've solved the problem, I'm usually happy about it. And that gets transmitted through the work, I guess. This is another oil painting, by the way, not a collage. And you can see the difference. They're related, but the oil paintings have a different, they have I'd say a more dense quality than the collages.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, because you pivot between collage and oil painting, how is your approach different between the two, or is it at all? And in that same line of thinking, do you find that they inform each other? Do you learn things in doing an oil painting that then you'll bring to collage and vice versa?
Well, first of all, I don't do them in the same time frame. Like right now, I just started a series of 6 paintings that I'm working on, and I'll probably only paint until January. I mean, I'm guessing. It's gonna take me that far to kind of exhaust what I'm working on in painting and producing a body of work. And then, at the turn of the year, I'll probably go back to doing collage, and I'll do that for a few months. I go back and forth. Yes, they do definitely inform each other. I never would never translate a collage into a painting because I never really start with a compositional idea. I really start almost with random configurations or shapes and then kind of go from there. But it's my sensibility is consistent, and the shapes that interest me and the color relationships in my work are characteristic in both media.
One of the things I appreciate that I think you do well, and I don't know if it's something that just happens naturally or if it's something you have a strategy around, but you blend a kind of organic shapes and inorganic shapes really efficiently and kind of fluidly. How much of that is something you actually actively try to do, or something that you've just noticed that gets brought out the more you do the work?
I just work with things I like. It's hard to know. I would never formulate that. No, I don't stand outside the process. Actually, this is a good thing. When I'm working, I'm not thinking much. You know, I'm really responding. I put things down, I respond. The way the painting is in the end, really, which is like a kind of a psychological experience, but not a literary experience. So I don't have that distance. However, when you're making something, if you're really making it and you're not like being hyper academic or something, you're really lost in the process. And I think you guys would probably identify with this. You're lost in the process. You don't have an overview. You're really struggling to keep it together in a way. And there's so many things happening at once that it almost seems impossible they could ever come together. So you work for a while and then you stand back, you sit down, you look at the piece, and then you're no longer in that same mindset. Now you have this kind of critical distance from the piece. And what I do in that situation is I actually try to describe what I did. I actually literally describe what I did because description is an enhanced version of noticing. And then I sort of like I assess what's on the painting. I sort of do an inventory. Then I go back into the fray and with this new insight that I almost immediately lose as I'm once again up to my neck in alligators. But a little bit of that sort of insight carries through. So it's a very messy process.
I think what's happening in the process, and there's this dynamism between a kind of meditation and psychoanalysis, kind of all happening at the same time. There's a call and response in that you're paying attention to what's arising, you're paying attention, you're observing what's happening in the movements of shape and color and actual composition of where a piece plays. But then you're also acknowledging that as pieces move, kind of pieces of you are also moving, and there is an intrinsic bodily and mental reaction to it, and things are arising within yourself as things are moving, and then it becomes the question of what is it that's arising in me when this color touches this color or this shape touches that.
You know the term haptic? It means touch, basically. So
Mhm.
we have a haptic response to the world through our hands, and there's such a thing as haptic learning. Like I teach color theory. That's my specialty, really, is color theory and practice. And the color theory, the color curriculum I designed that's in my book is really based on people painting colors, painting swatches, and carefully mixing them. Unlike Albers, who worked completely with found color, to make it more practically applicable, I sort of pushed my own pedagogy toward the physical manufacture of colors. And the reason I do that is because there are things you can't learn through language that you can only learn haptically, and that's through the hand. And it's like when you really understand something in visual art, I think as a maker, you understand it in your hand. I mean, you understand in your mind too, but it's really the hand that understands. So I think basically this bodily thing you're referring to, I really buy into that. I think that there's a way in which, especially if you're making a larger piece, I find it more so in a larger piece. This is another large one, it's 4 feet tall, where I had a bodily relationship to the construction of it that was really evident to me as I was making it.
I think there was something you mentioned earlier that I'd like to come back to. There was one of the pieces that you were mentioning had taken you a really long time and involved a lot of correction. And I'm curious as to what correction means for you and what you're trying to achieve through that correcting process.
So this is another oil painting. So in this case, that red ellipse in the center, that might have been a number of other places in the painting earlier. And then I scraped it off. It might have also been a different color. In fact, this is literally true. It was several different colors, and it was not necessarily nestled against that vertical the way it is here. So shapes appear in a painting, but their final resting place is almost never the first place I put them. Philip Guston talks a lot about this, about how a shape or an image has to earn its place in a painting. Like sometimes you can very quickly arrive at a very satisfying formal relationship, but you can't trust it. It came too easily, and it doesn't have the physical component. The other part of painting that's really important, and I think it's true in collage, especially the way I'm practicing it these days, is this idea of the art being both an object and an image. So it has an object, a density, like a sculptural reality. A painting on a flat surface is not flat in the same way that a computer screen is. It has physical incident that kind of interacts with our perception of a shape or an interval.
And I also want to ask about color. I mean, you wrote a book on color. So when you're working, creating a piece, is your use of color intuitive, or is it more intentional, or is it a mixture of both?
See, people ask me that question a lot. See, what I teach about color is really the recognition of the structure of color and really just noticing the facts of color. That's what I think about. But when I'm making my own work, I mean, I've been painting for so long and mixing so many, many colors so precisely in my lifetime that it's like breathing. Like I know I need a color there. Is it cool? Is it warm? Is it fully saturated? Is it broken down? Is it a chromatic gray? Those are all things I don't have to put into words. I just push the paint around on the palette until I see what I want to see and then I place it in the image. So I guess, but I'm not sure the distinction between intention and intuition. I think it could be both. But yeah, I see. I don't understand the idea of intuition as being distinct from thought. I think thought and intuition are married.
I think that can especially play too in the fact that when we tote around a word like intention, there's a maybe potentially a presumption in there that we are always and fully aware of what our intentions are. And I think as beings that have a subconscious level, we are not always aware of what our intentions are. So I wonder if part of that practice that you're doing in your work of trying to get to that layer is a matter of trying to even discover what your intentions are.
No, I
Okay.
wouldn't want to know what my intentions are. I have no idea. People ask me, why did you put that beige triangle, I mean, diamond on the right-hand side of this painting at that angle? I did it because it felt like the right thing to do. Think about asking John Coltrane why he played a series of notes that comprised a C major seventh in a particular solo. He's not going to be able to tell you why he did that. He did it because at the moment it seemed like just the thing. Or ask a chef why he's putting that precise amount of rosemary in the stew. Well, because it'll taste better if I do. That's basically the only answer. That's the way I feel. It tastes better.
Well, on that note, that was a lot of conversation to digest, and I appreciate how articulate you were about your work, and it was very illuminating to hear you talk about it.
Thank you. Well, I enjoyed it. And you guys had some great questions and insights. And I mean, I hope you edit a lot of that out. I think it was a lot, it was too much.
No, I think it was actually the perfect amount. I think it's wonderful. One of the great things about these conversations, if nothing else, than for me, is to see the wide variance of approach and thought and process itself. And so I think this, the way you're going about it, and the way not only the way you actually tactically go about it, but the way you're mentally going about it, and intellectually going about it, and articulating it is very unique to you as an artist specifically, but also kind of unique to some of the conversations we've had. And I think that brings a lot to what we're trying to do conversationally, and enriches the conversation in a really impactful and important way.
Great. Well,
Thank you for joining us, David.
you're welcome. It was fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah.